Hello, today we'll be talking about salt and how it affects sodium and how it affects our body. Um, Salt um, it has a big impact on our health and our health status, um, particularly if you have a chronic condition such as hypertension, chronic kidney disease, cardiac issues. Um, Salt can play a big part in how you feel with those conditions. Um, so it's very important to be aware and to understand what salt does to our bodies. Um, so I've also read some research where salt actually has is more detrimental to poorer health than say carbohydrates or sugar, which the media, a lot of people have focused on as to cutting out sugar, where we probably should be really focusing on the amount of salt or sodium that we're intaking. So um, let's kind of jump into it. Um, salt. So salt is obviously makes things taste better. Um, Salt has we've been using salt as humans for a very long time as a preservative, um, and uh, salt comes in so many different things that it's really difficult to identify sometimes, or even um, decrease the amount of salt in your diet. So um, we're going to go through a few ways and how to help decrease uh, um, the salt intake in your diet. So first, what does salt do? When we eat salt, what happens? Um, so salt, when we consume too much salt, um, what can happen is that it can act like a sponge. So think of a sponge, and then fluid will, you get fluid and it'll build up, and that can increase your blood pressure because there's less room for your vessels. So that can, when you have a smaller space, that increases the pressure in anything. So um, that's what tends to happen. Um, so when we eat too much salt, it's not necessarily the salt that's increasing the your blood pressure. It's the 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 fluid that you retain from that. So if you do have any retention problems, um, sometimes cardiac people with cardiac issues do, or chronic kidney disease patients, or if you do have history of high blood pressure, salt is incredibly important to maintain control. Um, so that's what happens is it takes in the pressure, or sorry, it increases the fluid on your body, and then it increases your blood pressure. Elevated blood pressure for an extended period of time can be bad for multiple reasons, but it can lead to other chronic health issues like cardiac diseases, chronic kidney disease. So it's really important to maintain your blood pressure for all of us. Now, I think I hear a lot of people say, "Well, I don't have any of those issues. I don't have blood pressure issues or this, so I eat a lot of salt." Well, um, that's not, that doesn't mean that you should not control or be aware of your salt intake. It's important for all of us to maintain a good, healthy diet, and which would be moderate to low in salt intake. Um, I think what's really important too for us, um, for people that are trying to lose weight, and why salt's important for that is if you consume a lot of salt, or for example, if you go out, let's say you go on a trip and you know that you haven't been cooking from scratch, or you've been going out to eat, and you come home and then you notice that the scale is a lot higher. That is probably from salt intake, uh, or even even if you haven't gone on a trip, even in our day to day, if you weigh yourself frequently, like every day or every other day, you may sometimes notice that there's a large fluctuation in the weight, high, or low, and a lot of that is due to the amount of salt and fluid that you're taking in. Um, so why that's hard, or why that can be problematic for people that are trying to lose weight, is because that can really affect you mentally. If you're constantly seeing that scale go up, down, that can really play a big part in your mental status. So if you're just, let's just, for example, let's say you've just been eating a lot of salt, and the scale has been higher and higher and higher, um, then you start to basically, lose your ambition, and you start getting in your head that it's high, but really in reality, it might just be that you're consuming too much salt. So that's why we say, maybe we weigh once a week, once every 2 weeks, um, kind of just so we don't get into those mental games. But that's why salt's important specifically for weight loss. Um, so now we kind of know why or what salt does to us, right? So next is, how do we decrease our salt intake? So the first thing I'm going to say is, sticking out my tongue, but we have taste buds on our tongue, right? One of those is the salty um, taste bud. Um, the salty taste bud takes approximately 30 days to transition from either way. So let's say you are a big salt eater now, and you're trying to decrease your salt. You decrease your salt intake, and food's not going to taste as good for a little while, but over time, roughly a month, you'll see that it will, you'll feel a lot better, or the foods will start to taste better with less salt. So that's where you want to get to. On the other side, if you've had a low salt diet, and all of a sudden you eat something that's really salty, it really, you really know that's salty and you don't like it too much. So that's important to realize too, that it takes time to taste, make the taste changes. But over time, eventually you'll get into it, and things will taste better. So that's important. So how do we decrease the salt? So everyone knows I say this, and I say this over and over again. If first and foremost, if you consume at least 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, that'll naturally, in their natural form, that'll naturally bring your salt intake down, on top of being lower caloric foods. So that's always where we want to focus. That's our base, is to try to get in 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Now, that's not always possible. So, and then the second way is to make sure that you are eating whole foods. So what are whole foods? Whole foods are things in their original form. So trying to think here, let's just take potatoes. If you salt your potatoes, or you change them from the original form, then they're not, that's not the whole food. So if you just have maybe a baked potato, and you put something on, or whatever you'd like to put on there, that's in its whole form. But when you start, putting things in there, and more salt, maybe, for this purposes of this video, is more salt, then that's where you start to increase your sodium intake. So that's not where the majority of our salt comes from. However, though, it's majority of our salt comes from processed foods. So that's a big thing, is, and what's a processed food? A processed food would be anything that comes in a box, bag, anything that you can, restaurant, fast food, anything that you can put in a microwave or oven and it's done very quickly is going to be a processed food, and there's going to be a lot of salt in there. Anything that is on the shelf that's not refrigerated, that should be refrigerated, probably has salt in it because that's extending the shelf life of it. So, be thinking about those things. In a grocery store, you always hear shopping the perimeter. Well, that's where the whole foods are typically going to be. When you're going in the middle or in the shelves, it's probably going to be a lot higher sodium content. So, those are things to kind of, think about. Now, what's the correct amount of sodium, per day? So, for an average person or someone without chronic conditions, the recommendation is 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. 23. That's not all that different than what's a lower or low sodium diet. So, someone with hypertension, maybe cardiac, depending on what your doctor says, your cardiologist, chronic kidney disease patient, they want to be in about the 2,000 milligram range per day. A really restricted diet would be about 1,500 milligrams a day. So for all of us, I think shooting right around that 2,000, 2,300 milligram mark would be pretty good. Now, some of you may be saying, well, that's a lot. Well, the typical American consumes around 4,000 milligrams of sodium per day. That's a lot of sodium. So we're over double of what we should be having. So how do we keep to that 2,000 milligram mark, 2,300? The easiest way is if you read labels, you look on the back, and you're going to, and I can show you here the food label. So you see, here's one of my Ensures, but this is a good example. So you see this, you're going to look for the sodium level. So there's the sodium. If you can keep, so this label is going to be one serving, these numbers here. So if you can keep that serving size to less than 300 milligrams, you should, in theory, stick to that 2,000 milligram, 2,300, somewhere in that range, per day. If you need a really restricted sodium diet, you should go below 150 milligrams. So that's really important. So again, just reiterate. So you look at the sodium level. This label is one serving. These numbers, and it tells you how many servings are in this particular food item, and that will tell you how much sodium you're taking. So you want to be below 300 or below 150 if you're really restricted sodium level. So those are that's kind of a nice way to kind of think about it and keep within your range. That's important. So again, that's important, but eating whole foods, eating lots of fruits and vegetables is incredibly important. A couple other things. I often get this question. You do need a certain amount of sodium per day to function, but it's a lot less than what you think. It's less than like 500 milligrams. That's usually what I get asked is don't you need a certain amount? You do, but it's not that much. The other question I really get a lot of is sea salt, like some of these Himalayan salts, some of these different salts. Are they better for you? Really, no. To be honest, there might be a few more minerals in there that you might benefit from, but it'd be such a small amount that that's not where I'd focus my energy on. If you want to be as healthy as you can, eat more fruits and vegetables. You'll get everything that you need from that. I think in general, all of us focus on these smaller things that probably aren't as important as some of the easier, maybe less sexy, just eating more fruits and vegetables. So that's kind of important. Those two things. The other thing is I'll say, okay, low salt diet, and instantly people will say, well, I don't salt. Again, and like I've said previously in this video, the salt mainly comes from processed foods. So even if you don't salt, look at your diet and see where you could be getting some salt coming from. Um, that's why sometimes journaling too can be helpful, is to see how much sodium you're getting in. Also, I think this is another part of this too, is that salt can kind of come in things that you wouldn't expect, like diet sodas. That's not a lot, but they do have, sometimes they have like 150 milligrams of salt. That adds up. Bread, that's always been something that's really been eye-opening for me. Some breads can have 300 to 400 milligrams in one piece. So if you're having a sandwich, just with the two slices on each side, you're gonna, you could be up at 600 milligrams. Well, then if you put deli meat, which is always high in salt, and then cheese, which is also another higher in salt food, you could be looking at a sandwich that has 1,000 milligrams of salt. That's incredible. I mean, that's an insane amount of salt for just one sandwich. That's half of your daily intake. The other thing too is, I think maybe the last point I'll make here is, it's almost impossible to control your salt intake if you eat out frequently. So if you're specifically fast food has a lot of salt in it, but almost any restaurant is going to use a lot of salt because it tastes good. So just keep that in mind. When you're going on trips or different things, make the best choices that you can, but more than likely there's not going to be a whole lot of, you're probably going to be consuming a lot more salt. And it's hard. So, of course, I just would try to recommend not to eat out so often. But sometimes we have to do it, or sometimes we want to do it. And so those, if you're going to be eating out, maybe make some other choices throughout the day, so you can keep that sodium level to where it's acceptable. Again, salt is a sponge. It soaks up fluid. That can raise your blood pressure. That can also be detrimental to weight fluctuations as well. That's why we control our salt intake. And again, having a lot of salt and a lot of fluid isn't good on our body for multiple reasons. Your heart has to pump more. There's just a lot of different things. So in general, we want to have a pretty moderate salt intake diet, which can be very, pretty beneficial for us. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining me on the salt video, and we will see you soon.